you will see actually we thought of the journey to bring companies back from being hit from the crisis to full back along multiple steps, along actually in this overview, like 5 steps. Everybody today is talking about, especially when you talk about operations and supply chain, about resolving and making the supply chain resilient. So really the immediate actions to handle the lockdown period. And now that we have the first announcement, especially in Europe, the go back to work period, which will bring along several elements of complexity different from the lockdown. That being said, there are already some players more looking forward that are actually very good at dealing with the resolve and resilience part of the problem statement, as well as the return and reimagination part. For instance, yesterday I was on the phone with the CEO from a large construction material distribution company. And in this case, yes, we're thinking about how to restart factories, how to secure transportation chains between point A and point B. At the same time, these people are already rethinking what will be the go-to-market model with the new requirements from customers, in particular in terms of increase of click and collect, e-commerce mode. That is a sort of reimagining of the supply chain, because what they operate today, they make already the hypothesis it will not be what their customers will like 6-9 months down the road. So they are tackling the immediate urgency while already having a lateral team in supply chain planning ahead for what will come in 6-9 months down the road and make them a winner player, stronger and healthier compared to competition. So it's not necessarily, this is a scale that you need to take sequentially. Actually, best practice is deal with the immediate and already think about the future. What we see are the real action items that companies in industrial world undertake to cope with them. I will quickly go through them and then make a couple of zoom on what I see coming up more frequently with COO and CEOs in the conversation that I could have in the last literally couple of weeks. As I was saying, first and foremost, what in particular in operations, what organizations need to deal with is the safety of the workforce, distancing rules, wearing of masks, sanitary measures at the entrance and the access points of a warehouse, of a factory, and so on, are the clearly tactical immediate actions that companies need to put in place. And actually, as you will see, to handle with that, what we see best practice doing is to set up a nerve center. Nerve centers are really like a group of people that are empowered with enhanced decision-making abilities to take decisions and quickly disseminate new practices across spread over supply chains and manufacturing networks. And the goal of that is really to protect and communicate those operational chains for the employees, to allow them to keep operating at the bare minimum during the lockdown and progressively starting up in the back to work phase that is coming up, for instance, in France from May 11th. In Italy, I understand it's May 4th. So it's really literally coming up in next weeks. That's why it's a very important, that's why these nerve centers, if not already set up, we see them being set up as we talk now, and increasingly, take a relevant role in the organization. Then actually, once that is set up, the next reflex is to go and think about the safeguard of the operation. So once I protect my employees and I find a viable way to bring, operations back to work, what people look at typically is, make a comprehensive overview and mapping of the entire supply chain from suppliers to end customers, identifying all the risks and defining mitigation action all along the chain. And there are many types of heat maps that I saw working well there. It goes from, when you talk about assembly industry, from literally taking the bill of material of key products, exploding it, and looking at all the suppliers that could be at risk because of the distance, because of the location, because of many items that could put critical supplies at risk. What I observe is also company because of that, working around what they call hot topics. So playing that, like putting out big procurement, big purchasing requests, because they believe that securing some supply of this critical and risky material could make a difference once, you know, that material becomes scarce and they are the one who own it, compared to other companies who instead don't have it. So there is a sort of like a speed race to identify those risky items and build contingency stock when possible. But that, of course, comes along with the cash considerations that companies in the nerve center need to take care of, because, you know, you cannot just place, you know, multiple big buys to protect everywhere. The second thing that I see doing is also sometimes tactical booking of transportation capacity where shortages are again foreseen. And then the last piece to mitigate the risk on supplies is many times identifying alternative suppliers and redefining fast-track methodologies to qualify new suppliers, so that, you know, if a second supply needs to be identified, you know, we don't go through the traditional qualification process that would take months. We do that literally in days and risk, accepting through the nerve centers to including take more risk, because, you know, there are things that in a compressed time horizon you just cannot do compared to the traditional process. Second item within the safeguard of operations that we see people working at is everything about planning. So the demand forecast and the adjustment of the plan. That brings plenty of considerations, meaning that you see companies, you see conglomerates that at the same time serve automotive players, construction industries, and maybe biomedical devices. In some cases, they are short in capacity. In some other cases, they need to basically shut down 90% of their plants because there is just no demand. In some other cases, they observe like a steady state because like everything about like food industry, construction, and so on have a, you know, first of all, some of them keep stable and some other have a longer lead time to adjustment. So the demand forecasting exercise is really an exercise that differs across sectors. And by the way, it's linked to a lot of uncertainty. We're building a lot of advanced analytics models to understand from the previous crisis how demand for different sectors correlates to GDP forecast. And you can see that the items of correlations are very, very different. And the GDP forecast have a variation and an uncertainty themselves. So basically companies, what they do is try to identify how their sector demand correlates to GDP and then play distribution analysis on, you know, forecast of GDP to prepare for the most optimistic and the most pessimistic scenarios in the management of the crisis. And actually what they define is they prepare packages with which they say, if in 3 months, in 3 weeks down the road, we observe that we are more in the path of optimistic recovery, we'll activate package 1 and we will reopen factories A, B, and C. If we are in the more pessimistic scenario, we activate the package B, and in that case, we only reopen 1 factory and the flows will be much longer and take all that consideration. So they basically do a lot of scenario analysis to adjust, you know, supply against different profiles of demand sector by sector. And as we were saying, you know, they plan for logistic disruption. So understanding also what if something goes wrong. I was mentioning that, you know, the longer lead times on sea freight because of quarantining of products, availability of tracking that is not always the same, availability of trains. So all of that also needs to be planned, and some companies are actually making bets in booking, making massive booking of this capacity ahead of time to protect, believing to, you know, taking an option, so to say, to protect some critical routes for their own supply chain needs. Those are very, like, as you can see, operational actions. In order to engage those, and then moving to the next and third bucket here to the point 6 and 7, companies on top of the nerve center need to adapt quickly the management systems that allow them to take the decisions. For instance, sales and operations planning is moving from a monthly process to a weekly or bi-weekly process. in which the reforecast of demand is done continuously and replanification is done continuously. At the same time, companies design very simple dashboards to understand, to enforce that organizations at the different level across different countries keep an eye on potential warning messages on critical suppliers. So really putting in place algorithms to scan the web for warnings on critical suppliers or critical, suppliers of supply chain services. Number two, cash control, because as I was saying, on the one side, many businesses are losing volume. On the other side, they want to place special bets on some big buys of critical raw material, and that creates imbalances in the balance sheet. So you want to understand what's going on, how you're managing your cash, and those dashboards are really crisis dashboards. You don't want 300 KPIs. You want those 10 KPIs that are easy to report on a daily basis and with which corporate can keep an eye on the different countries. Because the other things that happens in the management system is that the nerve centers, especially in big conglomerates, of course there is one at top level, but then there is the delegation of decision making at country plant level. And you need to do that because otherwise your speed of decision making would be too slow and you would lose against competition. So it's a delicate trade-off in which you want to empower and delegate, yet with a good set of KPIs, keep an eye on what's going on at country and plant level so that you don't have bad surprises, 3 months down the road with some businesses locally that have gone out of cash, for instance. And then last but not least, there is these, there are elements of workforce capabilities and a lot of mindset as well that needs to be fixed. Supply chain and manufacturing leaders can take a lot of the decisions, but they need a lot of support from management, from support functions like HR, finance, and so on, to adapt a lot of the, a lot of the way of operating. Just to give you an example, in distribution, in B2B distribution, many players are thinking of extending the payment terms to customers, because customer could be small craftsmen that could go belly up if they don't have an extension of payment terms after 2 months of no activity. And they believe that by doing that in a smart way, they could gain lifelong loyalty from this customer if they save literally their life. However, that brings along a quick and rapid change in all the invoicing process that now needs to take into account maybe 60 days instead of 30 days. So if finance does not react quickly to that decision, the whole process falls apart. Equally, if a company decides to open, for instance, the opening times of a distribution store to allow supply chain to operate maybe at a reduced pace, but for a bigger opening time, you need to adapt all the contracts of the people and put them on shift, while before they were working maybe 8 hours per day. Now you need to put even on 2 shifts. That is a bet that many companies are doing to not only to put in place, to enable the distancing measures in factories, warehouses, and so on, but also when their warehouses are the contact point with the transportation companies or end customers, that allows to reduce the density of the people coming in your warehouse. And it's a very good safety protocol to communicate to your customer or to your transportation third parties. But again, to do that, you need a quick reaction of HR people to adapt contracts, to negotiate that. And again, country by country, that requires different type of effort. So adjusting the workforce capabilities and including the mindset, the reactivity of the organization beyond supply chain is critical to embark the organization and adopt the nice things that you could define in point 3, 4, and 5. Because if you don't bring the people with you, that will never practically, operate in a consistent way.
Crisis has to be differentiated and needs to be looked at very differently per country and also per industry. And so just to give you a very rough overview, we also work in the healthcare and pharmaceutical industry. So overall, of course, this industry is now growing. So we provide serialization services in that industry. So we know extremely all over Europe. So we know very well which products are being sold in Europe, and we see rising sales. So people now stock up medical supplies at home also, surprisingly, yet for everything. And there is a huge demand, of course, and which with ripple down effects through the whole supply chain. We haven't seen major issues there, except for the items, of course, that everybody can read now and hear about in the press, like sanitary items and protective gear. But for the rest, we see pharma industry is relatively happy. We also serve utilities, electricity companies in Germany. They, of course, are happy. The media industry has different impacts depending on whether it's digital or traditional media. Traditional media takes a hit, of course, because companies cut back on the advertising spend. So we'll come to that in a minute, but one of the immediate responses of most companies is, of course, to hoard their cash and reduce external spending, and that's felt by all media companies. Now, we do a lot of business in traditional retail, and that's one of the segments that also hardest hit by the supply chain issues. In retail, you really see very different stories depending on whether you do traditional retail or e-commerce. Now, traditional retail is usually, I mean, they're in complete disaster mode, except if you do food, of course, they still operate, but they also have supply chain issues. In some countries, do-it-yourself is still open. But in most, it's a complete standstill. In e-commerce, and I'll talk a little bit about that. In e-commerce, it's actually not what you might expect, that it's good for everybody. You see some rise in e-commerce segments in some, but you also see a pretty steep decline in other segments. So one really needs to take it down to the various product levels. And the reason for that is that when consumers are at home or companies reduce their cash, they're not really in spending mode. So they're far more cautious when it comes to spending, and that is why you see, for instance, Zalando, I think Europe's largest e-commerce fashion retailer, they just instantiated a cost-saving program and expect a bad year. Now, if we look at traditional retail, that's certainly most interesting. With the shops closed, of course, they have no revenue, and the immediate impact that they have is they have to reduce their spending in money, reduce costs, and what they do is they have immediate layoffs, they cancel orders, so which means they try to stop everything in the supply chain that they had. That, of course, depends a little bit again on which segment you're in, but one of the hardest hit segments is fashion. If you now have in your fashion stores kind of the spring clothes, then you will not be able to sell them in summer or in winter, and you cannot use all of the things that you have already ordered. So people try to cancel orders, they don't pay the rent actually, they delay any investments that they can, they talk to all their suppliers to help them reduce costs, and has them like for 10, 50, 20 or even more percentages of reduce and reductions. And of course, they focus on the e-commerce and ship from store business. That is important. One of the huge issues many people have is, of course, that they are not as fully digitized as they should be. The e-commerce operation often struggles, so depending on how your supply chain has been set up. What we've seen in Europe is that quite a few companies have set up their warehouses in other countries, like in, I don't know, Poland or Czech Republic or whatever. And when the borders closed, they couldn't get any goods across the borders anymore. So e-commerce didn't work either. And that put quite a few of our customers also in crisis mode. So we have seen companies addressing us, asking if we can set up emergency warehouses to help them ship the goods. What we've also seen is with some companies that they had problems with the workforce. It's not only that you the sanitary measures you keep up, of course, slow down your production process, but it's also that some companies experience many people being sick. And if 50% of your workforce don't show up for work, obviously nothing else functions. So that's a huge problem. One of the remedies is, of course, ship from store. So you take orders online and then you try to utilize your stores as a warehouse. Whoever has set up this operations is now happy. Many have not set it up, and we are helping quite a few customers now digitize this part of their business much more to actually get around the crisis. People believe, and I think that's actually true, that what we are seeing here, this shift to digital, is not going to go away when the crisis ends, but it's going to stay. Many people will see, oh well, it's easy to order online. I can have the things fast if I want to. So we will not go back to where we came from. And we will see a strong shift to increased focus on e-commerce and omni-channel businesses. And we are now helping our clients already prepare for that. And then, unfortunately, of course, you already see a lot of Chapter 11 closures going on, and that plays out throughout the globe. You really see it coming depending on where the crisis hits. But in Germany, of course, you've seen some. In the US, there's a long list already. You see that in UK, in France, in Spain. Some, depending again on the segment you're in, but some say 30% of the fashion retailers will actually go down the drain. And that has ripple down effects through the whole value chain. So, of course, you see some brands disappearing. You will see that the manufacturing companies in Asia will be impacted because they don't get the orders anymore. That is actually shifting the landscape. It plays out a little different if you're, for instance, in consumer electronics than in fashion. It's not as bad because the TVs, of course, from spring can still be sold in summer. But the expectation here is that you will see large price wars. So people, of course, the supply chains have been geared to delivering a lot of products just in time. People have planned for certain sales. Sales is not coming around, so the goods are stocking up. You have increased expenses in your warehouse. People need to kind of reduce these levels again, and they're trying to sell off their goods already via e-commerce. So even if e-commerce is rising, by the way, many people don't earn any money there now because they're just trying to get rid of the things they have to manage the flow. And when the stores open again, we will see gigantic price wars. Again, several companies will not survive that. I can confirm actually what Valerio was saying, that most companies we talk with have different scenarios they plan with. So is a lockdown for 1, 2, or 3 months, and what does this mean? How much money do they lose, and can they actually survive that? The initial response, of course, is not only to reduce cash, but also to try to get help from the government, from the banks. And depending on how well you're off, you can survive that for a couple of months. But many will not, unfortunately. No?
We did build a very similar 5-step process to what Valerio had presented. And it's very similar. I think I'll just focus on the first two on the left, reaction and resilience phases that we feel that we're still in now. One, to diagnose potential damage, focus on critical needs. And then in the resilience to adjust your strategy, for short-term resiliency, preserve the business, and manage long-term risk trade-offs. And I think this is where we get into some interesting sustainability trade-offs, challenges that companies have encountered. And I also would note that this crisis has hit in the middle of a sort of corporate movement. And I don't know if you watch the sustainability news, but this idea of stakeholder capitalism, where business is being demanded by stakeholders to serve a larger purpose and to serve society, and that includes their suppliers, their stakeholders, the communities they're in, as well as their employees, is really being tested because it's basically now it's panic, all hands on deck. Is the business going to survive? But how are companies going to respond? So as you drill into this reaction phase, there's lots of things that I think everybody has already mentioned that companies are doing. What are the key areas of the business? Map my supply chain, found out where the cascading stoppages in supply are. Where is there going to be no demand? What things do we have to shut down? How do we conserve cash? But then also, how do we ensure continuity of essential goods for the world, for the community? I think those are, obviously concerns of governments, and maybe even how do we retool to provide those essential things? How do you adapt your business? So those are the main priorities I think that business and society have, and the risks and challenges that those introduce in this sort of immediate reaction phase. How do you adapt your business to run virtually? Not all businesses, of course, can, but even those that do are going to face challenges. How do you get the right data on your supply chain? Do you have the indicators you need to make the right decisions beyond even your first tier suppliers about their performance? And we'll come back to that topic as well. And then what are there's some uncertainty about the remedial actions. What can you do to help? And what really are the total implications of efforts to go either provide liquidity for suppliers to keep them afloat as well, and that sort of thing. So maybe I'll just, again, try to move as quickly as I can. Go ahead and put questions in the question pane. If I've gone too quickly, I feel like I want to leave time at the end. So I'll just drive through a few things that we did at EcoVadis and our defensive strategies. We created a task force, of course. We're only 600 people, but we're spread all over the world. So we're largely used to virtual work or virtual interactions, and now moving everybody home. That was a relatively easy adjustment for us, but adjusting budgets, targets, timelines so that you manage anxiety for people. And that's something that's been something we faced as a company, but we also want to help rated companies and suppliers that we assess. There's over 65,000 companies now in the network. Many of them are small and medium businesses. So of course we've tried to immediately allow invoices to extend out. We extend deadlines to complete the assessments and so forth, so that we can accommodate companies working from home. Another interesting fact there is that our engagement team, who call these the companies that are in the supply chains to try to encourage them to conduct the assessment so they can get a sustainability rating. There's nobody there at the other end of the phone if you're working remotely. So none of the phone numbers work. So suddenly our team is really left to only digital means to reach people, which is a little dehumanizing and also not as effective. So it's difficult work to keep people motivated, and even the companies that are still in business are difficult to reach. So morale, productivity, very difficult to maintain. In terms of offensive strategies, so we did immediately try to pivot. One thing we've seen industry-wide in every industry is that events are pivoting to be virtual events. And we actually, it was like a perfect storm. Our annual event, where we had something like 600 or 700 people registered to attend, was scheduled for the 12th of March. And on about the 5th of March, we pivoted and decided to shift the entire event to an online streaming event. And we basically took 18 people in our marketing team, almost everybody, and worked 100%, every day until we were able to get all of the speakers to get the right equipment in place and readjust the calendar, get a provider that could do an online event that quickly. And it went off fantastic. We ended up getting over 2,000, because we made it free. We had over 2,500 registrations, 1,700 simultaneous attendees. You can check out the content online. So that for us was a huge success story to pivot from, in-person to virtual. And I think that is a strategy that is going to stick, and we're going to continue with that. We already did webinars, but we didn't do entire events online. But this is something that's happening industry-wide for marketing teams from all of our customers, from all of our partners. Everyone is doing the same thing. So this is one sign of the times. In terms of operations, yes, we've reallocated resources, try and take expertise from one area of the company and reapply it elsewhere. From the product standpoint, we're trying to help our customers use our platform to filter out indicators of suppliers that will help them see who might be best situated to endure the crisis, who are taking care of their workers the best, or whose management system indicator in terms of sustainability, really is are best situated. So it filters out the things like, worker benefits and policies and so forth. So this is part of our assessment, but now this particular element, it's one of 21 criteria. These 2 or 3 elements now became very important. So we were able to quickly adapt and provide some tools on our platform to help companies identify them and help those suppliers that are good performers and so forth. So getting to this, there's an example of the health crisis KPI guidance that we provide on the platform. So this next resilience phase is actually even trickier, because as companies are trying to come back online, they need to manage their risk and survive, as mentioned by all the speakers. But it introduces sort of, for companies, how are you going to choose which suppliers to give the business to when you really only have a few or maybe one to choose from because others are not in business? If you still have supply lines that are active and ability to sell product, it's going to also create pressure on the suppliers that are left in terms of basically exceeding their capacity. And that's, in this time of urgency is going to, make them make tough trade-offs in terms of how do they treat their workers? Are they having to recruit quickly thousands of workers to support, a surplus of orders? And I'll give you a couple examples of that. And then that's in, businesses that are actually still functioning. For the suppliers that are not, there's also the question of how to support them. And of course, governments are providing liquidity programs, in the financial markets. Large buyers are doing similar things to try to keep their suppliers afloat. I think Unilever is one example. They provided some cash reserve to help suppliers to stay afloat. Danone did something similar. But it really begs the question, who do you choose to support? In the best of worlds, even in companies that have the best sustainable procurement programs that we've seen, and they really know which suppliers are behaving well, that are respecting human rights, have good working conditions, or not abusing the environment, they're going to cover 80% of spend. But unfortunately, that 80% of spend is fantastic, but the actual number of suppliers that it covers may be much less, far less than 50%, I would say, because of this long tail of suppliers. And many of those that may not have any indicators or performance information on in terms of sustainability are small and medium suppliers. Even though 80% of suppliers we assess in the marketplace, which is, there's 65,000 so far, 80% of those are small and medium suppliers. It's still a tiny portion of the total supply base. So even if done well, this is a challenge to choose who you would help, because the risk is, if you decide to pay invoices early and provide some cash for suppliers to stay afloat, what if that supplier is like the ethical trade-off faced by the National Health Service in England and governments all over the world who are providing rubber gloves for their healthcare workers, had this tough trade-off to make. They had to source those gloves from overbooked suppliers in Malaysia, who are the top suppliers in the world, who have all been subject to allegations of forced labor. So a really tough trade-off has been made, probably the right one, but it just exposes this concept of here we are in this crisis and realizing we've just exposed how little we know about really, which suppliers, when push comes to shove, we would really want to support. And I think at this early stage, even with the solid program in place, that where you have some data intelligence to guide them, it's just a tough challenge. So that's the kinds of things that we're trying to address and trying to help companies put in place strategies at each of these phases so that they can do the best job possible to really include this element of sustainable procurement and sustainability in building their supply base, right? It's not just an afterthought or a self-declared questionnaire. It's a performance metric that goes into the building of a supply chain so that you are flexible, you are able to adapt later, and you know who to prioritize to help that will prevent brand risks down the road and to really ensure the continuity of your supply.
Nobody expected this crisis and has all took us by surprise. It's a crisis which is unprecedented in the way, especially for supply chain, in the way it touches supply and demand at the same time. Has never, normally crises, they touch either one side or the other side of the supply chain. This is touching both. And also the wave goes from one area to another one of the world. We are having one area, we're having China. It's a wave which is not known in which direction it goes, and it goes in different times and in different zones. So it's going. So it started in China. Now China is starting, and Brazil is going in lockdown. So basically, it's really unprecedented and unknown. We were not prepared, and we're learning, learning by doing, learning along the way. So this is something which obviously has affected everybody and all communities. So I believe we have, when we talk about the collective effort, we have a number of responsibilities. We have responsibilities toward our employees. So I will tell you what we have done, what we are doing, and what we will be doing. So the first kind of responsibility, I said, is toward our employees. We have developed a very strict protocol, safety protocol, which takes into account all the strict rules to avoid contagion, whether it's safety gear, whether it's distance, social distancing, whether it's isolating surfaces. We have this protocol that we have developed, which is in 5 steps, and we have applied it to all our facilities, whether they are plants, whether they are network, whether it's our office buildings, and no facility is allowed to restart if they're not at level 5. And the level 5 is a level which is audited from external. We have set up a multifunctional team to develop this protocol. And we are applied, and we are almost 5 in all our sites. So we are well off. We have shared also this protocol with our suppliers. We have explained it and put it on the portal. So this is the way we are protecting our employees. We also have regular audits of this of the application of this protocol, and we will have permanent regular audits. We also are pushing teleworking. Obviously at the maximum by implementing tools, by synchronizing agendas, by the processes, by the tools, by the way we also we define our meetings which are fit for teleworking. So this is the way we're working. We're working to protect our employees and our customers. We have a second responsibility, which is toward the collectivity. And I'm very, very proud about what my company, for example, has done in this respect. We have put all our knowledge at the service of the collectivity. I don't know if everybody is aware, but the PSA is producing oxygen ventilator in their plants, which we were not producing before. We are a car manufacturer. We have given our knowledge, and it's amazing this how important this was, our supply chain and logistic knowledge to local administrations within Europe. And it's amazing how much they needed that, because to supply gear, protective gear, equipment, it's amazing how they needed this, because they're not used to just in time, they're not used to pull kind of processes. They are used to just pick up the stuff in a safety stock, and they just don't know how to deal with the supply in a pull or in a just in time kind of environment. So they really needed this help. We have given our IoT technology for contain that we have on our containers for tracking the safety gear. And finally, we have continued producing, repairing, and selling special vehicles like ambulances. We have continued during all this period. So basically, we have given everything that we could to help the collectivity overcome this sanitary crisis. And I must say that we haven't left anything, any stone unturned. We have also responsibility toward our customers. We need to allow our customers to avoid crowded public means from a safe perspective by using new cars at an affordable price. And this is something which is important. So we need to find new solutions for buying, renting, car sharing, used cars, or whatever can be safe for our customers, safe and affordable. So that's an important responsibility that we have. And also we need to promote safe and sustainability mobility. And finally, we have a responsibility toward our society because we need to make sure that this crisis, the moment that we finish the health crisis, it ends, it doesn't transform in economic disaster and social unrest or social revolution. So we need to make sure that it's economically sustainable, which means, and I'll come back to this point, that we need to be very careful, very frugal, and limit cash in. So cash out in line with cash in, which is obviously limited in this period. Limit cash, limit immobilization, limit stock, and again limit cash in line with cash in. And this is a responsibility to guarantee the sustainability, the economic sustainability of our company, and ultimately the jobs. So in terms of assessment of the current situation, so I'll try to go quick. So we believe that we should have more, I believe that we should have more lockdowns, obviously. Hence, we need an effective continuous improvement in order to face them more and more in an efficient way from a government perspective, but also from a company perspective, in order each time not to repeat the same mistakes of the previous time. The restart will be chaotic and slow. So this is something that in order to synchronize the supply chain, it will take some time and will be chaotic. So, and then it will be a stop and go. Interesting point, at least this affects the automotive. The market, the impact on the market is very, very difficult to assess. It's very difficult to assess because the cars are viewed as the only safe mobility device. So with that perspective in mind, obviously, we could expect a boom in the sales of cars. On the other hand, there is a second phenomenon, which is that people are scared, and therefore, when people are scared, they tend to save more. They tend to save more than to spend, which would expect a drop in sales. So it's very difficult to understand where the market would go. It can go in both sides in that sense. And, but certainly the demand or the customer behavior will change completely. So we need to be prepared for affordable and electric cars. I mean, we are prepared for electric car, but more and more affordable electric car. And I'll come to this point because there would be a big demand for safe mobility, and the car is the most safe, and also for a lot of pressure on CO2, more pressure on CO2. This is what we expect. And therefore, we need to answer to this change in customer behavior. The values attached to the purchase of a car will change, and therefore we need to be prepared to have the right offer for our customer bases. There will be a pressure, as I said, on CO2 because people will likely grow is a consequence of the understanding of the non-linear behavior of a crisis. And which might be extended to the climate crisis. People will understand that crises are not linear, and therefore this will create more fear on the CO2 and on the climate crisis, which is behind and will make a connection with the climate crisis. So this is something which we expect. Again, these are all expectations which everything is uncertain, so they're just, I mean, opinions, but this is what is expected. We have obviously public intervention, which is saving jobs, but of course this will be a huge cost for the community. So we don't know yet what this will mean in terms of how we're going to repay debt. So this is something to be expected. And then again, awareness, more and more awareness that solutions come from collectivity and not government cannot do everything. So a reinforcement of collectivity, of community, of local community, of solidarity, which could be the good part of the crisis, let's say the good outcome, but the reinforcement of collective behavior and collectivity solidarity, which is something which I expect. And finally, from a supply perspective, supply in the region for the region will likely become the norm. Again, we cannot afford from a risk perspective long lead times, and therefore supply region for the region will become more the norm than the other way around. That's my view. I will conclude the last few seconds on how do we prepare collectively for the future. Again, agility and flexibility more than ever. We absolutely need to plan and need to continue exercise this. We need to share the same health protocols so that we can ensure to have sustainability of the safety of the secureness of our supply chain. We need to be frugal, because the more frugal we are, the less immobilizations we have, the less cash immobilization, and the less painful will be the stop and go. The stop and go are very, very expensive. So we need to make sure that we minimize this expense, because we expect to have a lot of this stop and go. Again, as I said, we need to link the risk assessment with the supplier base. In order to react the quickest possible. We cannot be quick with, as I said, with a 3-month lead time. So this is to be expected. RETEX, PDCA, and processes to continue increasing flexibility. I mean, this is embedded in the automotive. I mean, it's kind of part of the culture of the automotive, the continuous improvement, the Kaizen, the PDCA, but it's something that we need to do continuously. Also in terms of how we face the crisis, how we faced the first lockdown, and how can we do better in the second one in terms of limiting the damage. Again, just to conclude, as a car manufacturer, as I said, we need to develop a wide range, or we need to develop or promote a wide range of low-cost electric vehicle. We need to develop all sorts of safe mobility offer to our customers, but also safe and affordable kind of mobility for our customer base.
I believe, same as Francesca, will be a series of stop and goes at different speeds, at different intensities, because of the geography of a virus and the geography of the strike. And indeed, the shock has been bilateral, demand and supply, and you have to manage both at the same time. What we found, what I personally have learned in this very intense phase, and things that have worked for us, which I hope will be of use for everybody. First and foremost, you have to drive engagement internally and externally, because in moments of distress, like the one we are feeling, people want to feel safe, and in order for people to act logically. If fear takes the front stage, then people start acting irrationally, and mistakes are made. And this is not a time where you can afford a whole lot of mistakes. So the way we drove engagement, we are driving engagement on a continuous basis. First and foremost, the health and safety. Again, like Francesca said, that's a paramount of any industrial company, so I'm not saying anything new, but you have to bring it to the next level. You need to make sure that people, employees feel that you're really taking care of them genuinely, not just because of facade. So what we've done, again, we are a pretty nimble company. The decision chain is pretty short. The mass of people we're moving is not as big as larger companies, but we have shut down all offices and went into a work from home setup way ahead of the government declarations. So whenever we saw that the issue was coming in Dubai or in Germany or in wherever we have offices in the UK, in Barcelona, we asked people to start working from home. People that are using public transport to come to work from home. we had a pretty robust preparedness plan. It does help us, the fact that our headquarters is in Los Angeles, so a seismic area. So we have very strong protocols in place ever since, because the company has been preparing for the big one, which was supposed to be an earthquake in Los Angeles. In this instance, this preparation, this muscle that we built in time came very handy. We had a very robust remote and disaster recovery mechanism in place, which we triggered right when we needed them and ahead of time. So employees felt taken care of earlier than the government clearly intervened. So that was the first thing. Second thing, you need to communicate a ton, internally and externally. So just to give you a sense, normally I do the classical, you do once a month business update, how we're doing, and then once a quarter webinar. I have moved to a almost frantic pace of communication. I give twice a week, so 8 times a month, for once a month communication to the employees, keeping them appraised of health and safety first, continuity, how is the business going, how is our supply chain going, how is our revenue going, how is our cash going, just to give them a sense and pass on to them the peace of mind that we can pass on, in the sense that the company is doing well through the crisis, we're taking actions, we are weathering the crisis, and I just want to make sure that employees feel safe in this environment. That's an internal communication that is very useful for us externally as well. Obviously, it needs to be tuned for an external audience. Again, we're a niche player. Our customers are typically entrepreneurs. They're not structured companies. So the mindset of an entrepreneur is a mindset of an investor. I put my own money on your products, Pelican products, because I know I will make money with your products. If I have fear as an entrepreneur that you cannot supply me, or that you have some issues that you will not be around in the near future, I swap immediately my investment. I am a portfolio manager. I invest elsewhere. So it is paramount that we keep engaging our customers, giving them the peace of mind. Look, guys, we're here. We will supply your needs, which, by the way, are not abating immediately. And we will be there after the crisis. Keep supplying you, and therefore, keep with us, keep investing with us, keep your business running, and you, by the way, you depend on your own business for your livelihood. So that message of continuity, of engagement is paramount, both internally and externally. Second thing we learned is that you need to act a lot faster. The cycles we're living now are not the cycles we used to live 3 months ago. Again, we had the classical forecasting cycles for reasonably steady manufacturing companies, where you would put a forecast 3 + 3 months ahead of time, and then you would review them in depth on a quarterly basis, and maybe you would tweak something on a monthly basis. That is gone. Demand changes on a weekly basis, and you need to adjust to that. So you need to get in a I'm not saying command and control situation, because you still need to delegate, but you need to get into an element of speed. The cycles need to be a lot faster, because the market is evolving a lot faster than in the past, and with dynamics which are not the ones they used to be. History is never a fantastic predictor of the future, and now it's even worse. You cannot base your demand on your last 6 months, your future demand on the last 6 months. That's impossible. So going back also to external engagement, the communication with the customers allows us a conversation with them, which is very intense, very continuous. We keep polling our customer practically on a weekly basis, which is something we've never done before. And by doing so, we get a lot of intel back in terms of who's open, who's not open. Can we ship you the trucks, or are the trucks going to get to your gate and come back? All of the type of information gives us the feedback to fine-tune our activities on the supply chain, both in terms of reserving the stock for shipments, organizing the shipments, and also planning ahead. So that is a virtuous circle, actually. By engaging more of the customer, you get better intel, and you can plan your shorter cycles better. Then, the third thing that I personally noticed, you need the microscope and the telescope at the same time. You need to really get down into the details. Again, what can we ship, you know, in the next couple of days because the customers are open or the borders are open, or can we get, you know, the Czech workers crossing the border and manning our machines in Germany or not? That's a microscope. By the same token, you know, we have a pretty long cycles of supply from the US or from China, and we are in developments of products, and we are locking in the capex for effectively the latter part of the year that will generate some productivity into next year. You need to keep that in place because you don't want to come out of the biggest depths of a crisis without having made the investments that then will get you where you need to be in the longer run. So you need to keep doing the helicopter, going really, really low and really, really high in terms of keeping a higher level visibility. Then the other thing that worked really well for us was the famous Ronald Reagan sentence, you know, trust but monitor. So, you know, empower locally, have people do what they need to do in the local markets, in the local functions. They are the experts. They are the ones that know better, certainly better than me. And even more so now that we are a little bit disconnected because we don't have the personal touch, the possibility to reach out to each other personally. But then you need to monitor. So you need to make sure that, you know, all decisions are not taken in isolation, but they become part of an organic plan. And that is, you know, that can be done thanks to a robust decentralization. So, for instance, in my view, having a robust IT tools, a robust processes has been of fantastic help. You know, we run SAP, not the most agile system, but having a unique and well-deployed, well-integrated IT system that encompasses everything. Frankly, we run it throughout all functions has been of fantastic help. And you know, we would be going crazy with Excel spreadsheets and matching data that doesn't match. So having a backbone, an IT backbone that is fully deployed and well with good parameters and well embedded into the mechanism of the company is very important, as well as, let's say, soft processes, planning processes, reviewing processes that allow people to take decisions, and then you control if everything is going fine, you put into an organic view and you move forward organically. Then another thing that I noticed personally, one size does not fit all. You get the classical CFO statement, extend payment terms to all suppliers. And yeah, sure, you know, and save cash. It doesn't work that way in my view, or it doesn't work that way in my world, and it doesn't work that way that well. Yes, there are instances where you can ask help to your suppliers, and you should ask help to your suppliers. We're all in this together. Like Francesca said, I fully agree. You know, integrated supply chains need to be integrated in moments of help or joy and moments of distress. Now we're in distress, so you need to work well. But you cannot do it with everybody. There are suppliers that are, again, we're not a mass player. Some of our suppliers are smaller companies. Some of them are hand to mouth, not necessarily hand to mouth, but, you know, they don't have so much treasury. So if I extend payment terms to a pretty critical supplier, I might run the risk of sending him belly up. And then for a small piece of a puzzle, then I'm screwed, you know, I'm stuck. And so that is where, you know, one size does not fit all. Same thing, you know, forget extending payment terms to customers. Well, again, we are in a lucky position that we are very cash positive. So a couple of customers, long-term customers, 30 years customers came to see us and said, look, I really need that for now to extend the payment terms because I'm not getting paid by some of our customers, but I have this very nice program that would allow me to pass over the hump. Can you extend the payment terms from your customer 30 to 90 days? We check it, we can afford it, we trust the guy, we know them, we've been knowing for 30 years, yes, we extend them. Other people were extremely stringent. So yes, I think, you know, you preserve cash by extending payment terms to your suppliers and reducing receivables terms from your customers, but you shouldn't do it in one go. It's not monolithic. Diversity is very, very important. The last piece that I learned myself, we're a premium company. Again, we're a niche player. In our niche, we are the most expensive player by a stretch. We're the premium brand, the premium company, so our price point is way up there. And we've always kept it that way because we have a brand and because we have the quality that goes with it, plus the offering. And cascading it down to our supply chain, we've always taken, I think, now a very wise decision to work only with premium partners. So we externalize a lot of our activities. And whenever we work with people, we always choose people not because we are the cheapest, but we choose them on the basis of quality. Again, our third-party logistics, our kick-ass third-party logistics partners, they have not skipped a bit. They have not... From the moment COVID came out, we reached out to them. They all had bomb-proof emergency preparedness programs, redundancy programs in case people fell sick, health and safety programs. Same for the forwarders we're using. So, thanks to having, a premium collection of partners within the supply chain, we have not halted, we have not been impacted by any stop and go so far, and God forbid that will happen in the future. Things are restarting up. We have more people coming into the facility in Germany now. So, we're seeing a little bit of an upward momentum, although slow, and we expect some stop and go, but we have seen the value, which you always, tout, but in easy times, you tend to skimp on the quality of your suppliers at times. You go for cheap because you want to make the good number in the quarter. I am so glad that we have not done that in time, and we have forged very strong relationships with premium partners, frankly, and that has been, really, really useful for us and valuable.
One of the key changes is the loss of relevance from historical trends used for forecasting the demand, right? Obviously, industries are facing an unprecedented situation. Some of them in the short term having a heavy decrease, shown here in the slide with a red curve on a light vehicle example, but some others are having a massive increase in demand, for example, in pharmaceuticals and medical devices. In any case, right, we cannot base the forecast on historical trends. So therefore, what companies are putting in place is, a combination of the best human and digital tools available, right? Here on the right-hand side of the slide, you can see some of the levers being put in place, some of the activities that companies are taking, which basically they combine, establishing a strong team of data analysts and demand planners, inputting on an analytical model any new drivers that are available to forecast and predict a bit the new demand, and obviously intensifying the bonds with our customers, right? So this is kind of number one in the short term, the end of historical trend for forecasting. Moving to the next slide, we also, and this one is more on the mid-term, is the change of the archetypes, as we call them, in the supply chains of the future, right? So I think almost forever, the efficient supply chain had been the predominant archetype. And a lot of the incumbent models, such as digital, green, e-commerce, omnichannel supply chains had been a bit postponed. And I think obviously, right, in the future, the cost pressure will remain. But this new post-COVID situation will trigger the adoption of more than one archetype, balancing now efficiency with many new factors in the design. And I think that already the other panelists have covered some of this integration of more and more digital tools into the supply chain design. Jumping onto the next slide. And as I said, right, I also wanted to put some stress on the supply angle, right? So, because we talk a lot about the changes in demand and the changes in, logistics and networks, but obviously the source and the manufacturing sites are very much affected, right? We see obviously three main drivers of the change in the way supply is being driven. On one hand is workforce safety. So obviously, the social distancing, the absenteeism is affecting the sites, and workforce safety needs to be taken a lot more into account, even more. The second is the importance of supplying the markets in what we call a non-nominal organization, right? And I will cover that in a few minutes. And lastly is the agility, right? So the restrictions could evolve and last for a long period. So obviously the decision makers and the supply end, they need to learn how to be more agile and how to deal in a much more uncertain environment. So moving on to the next slide. What we're starting to see, right, is that manufacturers are facing, you know, a 15 to 30% capacity reduction on their manufacturing sites, and as well on their supply, you know, supply centers such as the warehouses or cross-docking warehouses, both at the site and in the markets. Obviously, they are having as well, you know, unstable supply by their suppliers. In this case, I've populated this slide with an example from the pharmaceutical industry. The portfolio is also changing. So the lots and the number of products having to be supplied is changing. The performance of the assets on the sites is also being affected. So social distancing is affecting, for example, the time that it takes to change over the assets, how the shifts patterns are being managed. So for example, people cannot come in and leave the sites at the same time. So this is also having an effect in capacity. The third-party services and contractors are also being affected. Absenteeism is a big thing, both from a health perspective as well from a social distancing effect. So overall, right, the supply is being constrained, and this is putting a challenge in the supply chain overall. Moving on to the next slide, Paulo. What I was saying, right? I think we said, and it's very clear to everyone that the supply chain needs to increase transparency, but obviously the supply also needs to anticipate uncertainty. And one of the solutions that we're seeing, and a tool that it's going to be now business as usual, is these virtual model simulations for our supply end of the supply chain. So companies are starting and to develop their own, you know, models of their supply flows and assets. So characterizing each of the assets that they have from a capacity, from a productivity, from a performance and cost point of view, to help predict and optimize the new normal. I think, I mean, we are seeing, you know, in terms of what are the hottest words now at the moment is simulation and optimization, right? So I think people at the supply end, they need to learn now how to anticipate by applying different constraints to their own processes. They would have to redesign a lot of their operating model processes, like the shift pattern, like the bottlenecks might be changing, the way the stocks are located, the buffers. Therefore, they cannot do that by try and error. They cannot do that anymore just by continuous improvement. They need to learn on piloting that much earlier and providing a lot more transparency to upstream and downstream. Just to like last couple slides here, Paulo. One is here, you know, and here's a representation of what does it mean, and how does the new site and network should be piloted, right? So we see on the left, right, some of the key questions that the people that is managing supply would be asked, right? So how much additional demand can the site produce? And that cannot take, you know, a week or two as it takes right now, where sites need to look, okay, let me check how my processes, how does it fit? How long it's gonna take me? You know, how many people I need to hire? How many contractors are available? I think that these type of simulations need to be much more at the click of a button and much more agile. You know, for example, also a big impact is with contract manufacturers, with the, you know, reshoring of a lot of production in this region-to-region production, as Francesca was describing. So CMOs would have a lot more to say, and this capacity allocation optimized between our sites and the CMOs will have a lot more importance. the lead times that we were discussing, we need to anticipate much faster the changes in lead time with the different constraints. So this is also, a simulation and optimization tool that the sites are going to need. I was talking before on stock levels also because of the cash impact. So sites would have to optimize a lot more their stock levels, and they cannot, again, do that through continuous improvement and through Excel-based type of exercises. What we're pushing for here is really a model much more robust, which is building on advanced analytics in order to really calculate with multiple constraints what the outcome should be. And finally, what's the bottom line impact of all these changes, right? I mean, if I increase my stock, if I reallocate volumes to the CMOs, how does my unit cost is affected? And this, again, cannot take weeks or even days, right? I think that we need to be able to respond much rapidly to demand changes with accurate predictions.
So which action have we taken during this past time and to make sure that we stay afloat? Well, first, we have, as I said, we have shifted with the highest sense of urgency to crisis management with a central team, with a lot of delegation to the local team, with multiple daily meetings as everybody, but not only. And that's where I would like to spend the most of time. We are also creating new way of workings that we believe are making today our operation and will make tomorrow our operation more resilient. And just to reflect on what was said just before, the resilience of our supply chain is what we are going to invest the most in the coming months and in the coming years. So for example, we have implemented new digital tools. And obviously, by the current situation, it hasn't taken 10 decision committees and 6 boards and multiple meetings. That's the beauty of a crisis. You need to decide fast. You need to decide simple. So that's a big opportunity. So for example, just simple things. We have set up digital tools to send surveys automatically to our suppliers, to answer that allows them to answer in less than 30 seconds about what is their status, are they closed, are they open, do they have any capacity issues, do they have any transport issues, and by that we've been able to survey thousands of suppliers, and again they have been very responsive. So we had like daily status, nearly real time, about what was going on in our upstream supply chain in terms of what are the bottlenecks. We have also taken the opportunity to speed up a lot of projects we had already undergoing, like extractions of our multiple ERPs, gathering into dashboards by developing simple routines and providing that to local teams to make sure they had the critical purchase order in hand with the right stock level in hand. They had all the digital dashboard that have been dreamed of. For the past year, they had it in a couple of weeks. So, and of course, we have also set up simple tools. Some are in the markets, but you need to decide, okay, what is critical for my operations to sustain the operation, to increase visibility, to share action plans. So we have digitized all action plans with suppliers on a single platform, visible to all stakeholders, with workflow models, and that has proven to be very effective and very, very reactive, whether before we were more on a slow pass mode. And of course, we have, this is digital tools is not the only thing. I think we have connected much better with the operations, with the management of the operations, with the business line, to make sure that we address the right urgency. So we have really tailored our upstream actions with suppliers with the day-to-day urgencies of the operation, because in that case, I mean, S&OP doesn't work anymore. Priorities that can change from half a day to half a day. We cannot have a monthly cycle. So we had to find a way to select interactions with operations and to make sure that we address the right priorities. And of course, that has been a challenge, because you can imagine that going from a finished product to a component level inventory visibility takes a little bit of challenge. And of course, we have also engaged, that's where I would like to speak about the future, on a new supply risk management that we were already, on the past before, we were having some kind of risk management, but honestly not fully and not to the extent that we wanted to have. And of course, we have also tailored this risk management based on the COVID-19 and how we see the COVID-19 evaluating and having an impact on the business in the coming 2 years. So it's not a business as usual to do risk management, to look at the market, to look at the geography, to look at the dependency, but it's under the light of the COVID-19, how the COVID-19 will act on certain commodities, on certain parts, on certain suppliers, on geographies. For example, how the COVID-19 will increase the weakness of civil aircraft supplier base. How in some case it would be good to source in Asia, in some case would be not good to source in the US. It really depends on the market dynamics in the light of the COVID-19. So basically, we are starting to be modest, to adapt our supply chain risk management, tailoring it at commodity level based on the evolution we see on the COVID-19.
To give you maybe a short overview, so we're thinking about basically this current COVID crisis in 5 different steps. So resolve and resilience are a lot about how to manage the short term, setting up a nerve center to manage the crisis, thinking about resilience, so how to plan for the next couple of weeks with the uncertainty that's there. Then the return topic that I'm focusing on today. But what we should also take care of, and I think that will be partially captured today or also in the next session, is this element of reimagination and reform. So how do we need to restructure our supply chains going forward that we're a bit better prepared when such situations might come up again? What are now the elements in Europe maybe that we see? There are some initial startups that we're seeing. So Volkswagen is starting up its factories again. Well, and there's just been in the news that, they're also seeing some issues on the demand side, and therefore, let's see basically how they react now. So you also need to be flexible. But one element that they've been putting quite a bit of focus on is really safety measures. So they've introduced over 100 different safety measures in now their factories. If this is about how many people are allowed in the same area, if this is about taking temperature checks, or also how can you, for example, use the canteen, and so on and so forth. So one element is really, as you restart your businesses, really think about a guide on how to provide now the corresponding health concepts, how to ensure basically the health of the employees. Because let's not forget, first and foremost, this is not a business crisis, this is a human crisis, right? And in that sense, basically, if you don't make sure that your employees feel safe and are safe, then, you put this entire business at jeopardy again. So a couple of additional examples here maybe. H&M is going a bit of a different approach when it comes to payment terms than a lot of the other companies. So you see very often right now that companies try to stretch payment goals and so on to increase their cash. H&M continues basically paying their suppliers as they've done prior to COVID also. And I think this element of collaboration with suppliers is absolutely essential, as you rely on them at the moment to ensure basically that you also can produce. Lego is taking some innovative approaches to get closer to their customers, to children and parents, having set up a online learning platform for them, for example. I mean, one example here, but especially as all of us get, let's say, a bit more distanced at the moment because of our necessity to work virtually or have more social distancing, less interaction, it's important that you actually stay close to your customers. Some other examples also below on how companies have been using to repurpose some capacity and their capabilities to actually produce more protection equipment, for example, or also basically to improve the agility of the operations. So when we think about return, there are actually 4 focus areas that we would stress. And I mentioned most of them already. So the first is health and safety of the workers, both in production and distribution sites. That is absolutely the number one, and it's all about how do we protect their health, how do we ensure now the right hygiene standards, do we need to adapt our facilities for that, and also, and that is important, coming up with plans, how do we react once we return now, and we notice, okay, we do have an outbreak here. Or health issues. How do we actually contain that, and how would we react in case something like this happens? And I think this is not, it's paramount that you not just basically then restart and try to deal with these elements once they come up, but that you have a plan basically ready to act upon so that it doesn't hit you by surprise. And from my personal experience now with all of my clients, to be honest, no matter what else I will tell you, this is the number one topic for all of them. And so whenever we're discussing COVID, it's at the moment actually about the health of their employees. It's about how they're improving the safety measures there, and so on and so forth. Everything else is secondary. Talking about secondary elements, I mentioned the element with the suppliers already before, and also with staying close to the customer. So what is essential here is that you over-invest in communication. Let's face it, all of us face uncertainty when it comes to demand and supply, and we try to deal with that as good as possible. So what is important here is that you actually share the information that you have, that you share your plans, that you share potentially likely scenarios and so on with your suppliers, but also that you stay extremely close to your customers to understand what are they planning. Forget about now your traditional statistical models or so in demand forecasting. I mean, they might have worked basically in a somewhat stable situation. At the moment where so much depends on for example, governmental plans to reopen, on how the market will react, on your availability of supply, and so on and so forth. You need to simply understand what are the customers planning. This will not give you certainty, but it will be much, much better than any statistical model that you would be able to come up with. And then it's really about thinking also in scenarios. And this is something where I thought this would be purely manual in the current situation, and it is mostly manual to think through then, okay, what are upside potentials, what are downside risks, how would our base plan then need to be adapted. But what I interestingly see is that a lot of our clients currently approach us and also want to understand how advanced analytics can help them. So they want to understand how can they actually include different external influencing factors into some models. Can they use these models to better predict what the demand will actually be like? And I see a huge interest there in not just using this technology now, let's say in the current situation, but they're actually discussing to a large degree also, can they make use of the insights that they're having at the moment to actually upgrade their planning systems going forward also. And then also coming to the last step, implementing improvements for supply chain efficiency and resilience. So this is really about, if you're thinking about what happened a couple of weeks and months back, I mean, this hit most of us, well, not really well prepared. So I think each and every one of my clients was surprised, obviously, by the magnitude. I think like all of us were. And although some contingency plans have been in place, simply the global magnitude of this and how it spans across countries, regions, also sectors, has been something that nobody has been prepared for. But also this has shown them that actually this topic of supply chain risk management, which has been a topic that was, yeah, theoretically nice, and everybody liked to have BCP plans and whatever, it was something to have for audits, right? Now suddenly it's something that also clients start seeing as being essential for their business continuity going forward. And this is something where at the moment, also in this situation, it's important to understand what are actually the challenges that are coming up and how can we translate this into some plans that we might be a bit better prepared in case of future instances. So obviously, probably the likelihood that something exactly like this will happen again is very low, but the likelihood that something will happen at some point of time is obviously always given. And so this is really about how can we make sure that we're more resilient when it comes to our supply, when it comes to our production locations, facilities, labor. So this is the moment actually to start thinking about it, but obviously this will not be solved then in the next couple of months. This is something that needs to continue thereafter. Last but not least, I mentioned basically that we should leverage the current situation then also to make our supply chain more resilient. But also, for example, to work on our supply chain organization, but also if we have, for example, now safety issues in our plants, or if we see, for example, we need to do certain maintenance work or stuff like that, let's use the current situation also to address those elements in case we're seeing lack of demand. Luckily, there's also another, let's say, group of companies, and luckily all of my clients are in that group, where the issue is rather the other way around, that they are having record demands, and this is really more about then making sure that we can supply. So again, maybe just summarizing a bit, what I presented in the last couple of minutes was really this element about returning now to the new normal. How do we start up our operations again? What do we need to do in order to stay safe there? How can we try to, let's say, manage this volatility a bit more? And for that, basically, the four elements would be really to first and foremost work on protecting the workforce. It's second around really stepping up again collaboration and communication with customers as well as suppliers. It's around being more flexible in your demand and supply planning, thinking in scenarios and risks. And last but not least, then also using this opportunity to actually trigger now first changes now in risk management and also operational changes going forward.
Insight that I wanted to share with you. The first two ones are what has been, let's say, in our opinion, impacting the market, no? And we have seen that this COVID has created difference between the companies, industries in the degree of digitalization. To people that was not very familiar with what digitalization means, today the crisis has made crystal clear about what digitalization means. No, for example, in our case, being a pure, let's say, digital company, obviously with a physical footprint, a physical supply chain, because we are an e-commerce company, our degree of digitalization has been a competitive advantage. No? And I think that this this point of digitalization as a competitive advantage is something to highlight. No? And I think that there is going to be a trend towards the acceleration of this factor. No? And like, for example, customers getting used more to e-commerce. No? This can be a shift that this coronavirus can bring. No? Another key topic has been cash management. Here, our priority as a company, and you see most of the retailers taking positions to protect their cash, renegotiating all the contracts, renegotiating, for example, the contracts with the stores, with the suppliers, etc., to protect the cash. No? And for example, if we speak about fashion retailers, they have a cash cycle in which they have to sell this season to pay the next season. No? And this crisis has accumulated a high amount of stock pending to be sold, and the cash positions of smaller companies are really at risk. No? Here, what we are doing is trying to help them to mobilize the stock through our obviously our webpage to sell the products and to get cash to pay the next season. No? This happens exactly with for example, big brands, or imagine a chocolate manufacturer that needs to sell all the stock before summer because they don't distribute in summer. No? So this crisis really has stressed the cash point. No? And here we are playing a relevant role. Two last reflections. First one is how were we able to react, or how did we react as a company to the crisis? Firstly, we have adapted our product portfolio. For us, it's very easy to have the demand sensing, because being an e-commerce company, we know every hour what we are selling. So basically, for us, it's very easy to adapt. For example, if home care products are increasing and fashion products are decreasing, in the beginning of the crisis, what we did is to increase the offer in what was needed, no basic product, etc., no, to support customer needs. No? For example, now we are let's say seeing in Europe the beginning of the unlocking situation, and people is coming a little bit more to fashion, and then we are increasing the assortment in fashion. And in this agile way to work, we have also have to overcome a lot of disruption in terms of our distribution network, beginning from our international transportation capacity, domestic. We faced several disruptions in domestic networks. For example, in which delivery suppliers totally closed, locked the service. All drop points have been obviously closed. All the convenience stores closed. Or, for example, some of the suppliers of the carriers have restricted the delivery service to only small parcels. So all the big parcels that we were, let's say, producing, we had to look for an alternative. And we have, let's say, created a new, improved ecosystem of decision making that I think will help us in the future. Last reflection from our side is now we are making a recap in which things will remain and which things will change. No? And I think that there will be a lot of things that will change. For example, in terms of people, the way we come back to work. Today, we are not asking people to come back to work because we are, let's say, happy with the performance, and we are rethinking how to define the workplaces, how to redefine the layouts, etc. In this case, we are highly automatized, and our high degree of automation is allowing us to recover capacity very quickly in the lockdown or after the lockdown. We are also focusing on helping in the brands, because now today brands have let's say an increased need of selling the stocks and need support to go online. So we are focusing also in that, and also for brands, for fashion brands, for example, it's also time to rethink on the paradigm of sourcing from China or from Asia with long cycle times between design, purchase, manufacturing, and distribution, or having shorter lead times, demand closer to production closer to demand, etc. No? This is will the customer behave the same way, or for example, is the customer going to be, let's say, more oriented to less products, more quality, more sustainability, etc., so that they will produce less quantities, and then all the manufacturing and production setup is under question, no? Is under question mark. And for the customer, clearly, we are focusing on recovering the service level as soon as possible, no? So we are focusing on what will change, and we are thinking in how can we go to a better normal, no? How can we, for example, rethink our flexibility for our people in the how can we better define our network design, decentralized versus centralized network, and there are a lot of decisions that we are now reconsidering. For example, about sustainability and about the impact of our logistic network in the business. No?
So I published an article long time ago now in the Harvard Business Review on the AAA supply chain, and that article was about agility, adaptability, and alignment. And I think those three A's are still very, very relevant today when we are combating the COVID-19 pandemic. Of course, I think we have to use new tools, new ways of doing things, and new imagination and creativity to do that. And one thing I would like is to remind us, and I'm a football fan. I think I am speaking to a lot of my audience here from France, from Germany, from UK. So football means soccer in America. We have to distinguish between football versus soccer, but I know football. I am a football fan. And France, of course, has done quite well in the recent decades with the World Cup champion, and Germany always is very strong. But I was reminded in 1974, a long time ago when I was very young, that the Dutch team, the Netherlands, has come up with a very powerful team. And I think you might also recognize Johan Cruyff, and it's a very, very powerful team. And that team was considered to be a revolutionary way of playing football. And the famous thing about that is that they play total football. They call it total football. What is total football? And total football was the term used to identify with this Dutch team. And by total football, it means that when the teams are not separated into you are a defender, you are playing a forward, or you are playing center forward, center half, we all can be defenders and we all can be attackers. And so it's total football. And when we think about supply chain, I think supply chain needs to think in terms of total football. We should have total supply chain. Total supply chain means that the supply chain can be used to defend, to help companies to protect them from their assets deterioration, from their service improvement, from the cost containment, from their lead time reduction. But it also can be used to attack, to offend, meaning that we can use the supply chain to win new markets, new customers, new products introduction. And some of the examples that Victor and also Jürgen talk about really are the elements of total football and total supply chain. So when we think about agility, I think agility in defense means that we have to make sure we have visibility. We are responsive so that the disruption hopefully will be contained. The COVID-19 was a big disruption, and some companies are able to do it to minimize. Victor used some great examples of how they try to minimize the extent of the disruption. And many people said, well, that means that you have to have a good supply chain mapping, knowing who are your suppliers? Where can we find if one supplier is disrupted? Where can we find alternative supplies? We have to have visibility, multi-tier visibility, ensuring operational continuity so that we can still fulfill the orders with speed and reliability. But now we're turning to a stage which Jorgen used a very good term. I think McKinsey has come up with a series of very good reports about the fact that, yes, we should contain, we should be resilient, but we should also start thinking about reimagine, rethink, reboot, renew. I think those are great way of frame that we should look at offense. Offense means that, like what Victor said, we have to learn about the new preferences of the consumers. And the consumers in the new normals is different from before. Offer them with new products and new services. Understand the smart risk analysis so that we can do things in the proper way and build a new kind of resilience. And so those are all the very good thoughts that Jorgen talked about: rethink, rebuild, reimagine, and Gardner used the term reboot. I think that's all about offense. Same thing with adaptability. When we talk about adaptive, being able to adapt, well, the defense is very much short-term adaptation. Immediately, wow, we cannot find the supply source from China. China was in the lockdown stage in February, in March, early March. And so can we find some alternative suppliers from Vietnam, from Cambodia, or can we find nearshore suppliers, local suppliers? And so very much it's a short-term thing. And I think Victor also talks about Inditex and some of the US as well as other manufacturers to say, hey, can we modify our factory so that we can make masks, so that we can make ventilators, so that we can make the personal protection equipment. And so I think that those are, and plus how about using accelerating digital technologies so that we can have people staying at home and work at home. And I think a lot of companies have to learn these new work protocols and using technologies instead of used to be the old way of doing sensing, finding out what's going on. Where is my factory's capacity? Where is my factory's inventory? So this really is an acceleration of technologies to try to adapt the supply chain to meet with the immediate needs of the customers and the new supply sources. I think Victor talks about the online presence. And it's good that because his company has always been anchored on online, but some other companies which are used to be mostly brick and mortar has scrambled to rush to online. And so I think that this is really defensive move. But going forward, what Jorgen talked about, the McKinsey advice that we have is to think of this as a new way of doing things. The acceleration of digital technology means that this is going to be the new normal. We have to learn how to do sense and response in an end-to-end way. We have to be very strong for a brick and mortar company that omni-channel is the way to stay. This is the new way. People are now used to having takeouts, deliveries, or shopping online. This is the new normal. So we have to strengthen the supply chain. It's not to stop the bleeding of the blood, but it's helping us to renew our bloodstream, re-energize us. And so I think these R words are very good. The R words of rethink, reboot, renew. And terms like federated supply chain has come up. The Sourcing Journal yesterday has come up with an article that says that we need to have a new way of supply chain, which is, they call it the term federated supply chain. So federated supply chain, meaning that we need to have a configurable supply chain. Some people thought that, okay, China long run may not be the right answer. So we have to move around a new configuration. Well, is the new configuration regionalized supply chain? Some people thought that the new adaptation is to have more regionalization. And then this morning, I just read that Nissan just announced that they're going to close some of the European plants. So they're reversing the domestic regionalization trend. Why? Because the worldwide demand is different from before, and they may have redundancies, they may have overcapacity. And so is the right answer regionalization or not? And of course, I think as good consultants always say, the answer is it depends. Yeah, and so we have to, and maybe the better way to do that is to have flexible configuration so that we are able to, if something happens in China, we reconfigure the supply chain and lock down China, and therefore we use new supply chain. But as China has come back to full production capabilities, and some other locations have been disrupted, and we reconfigure, maybe we now go back to China. And I always emphasize is that the ability to do reconfiguration is the new rules of the game. And you never should be tied to a single supply chain strategy. We need to think about dual response meaning that there has to be parallel. Configuration gives us that parallel. You should have the cake and eat it too. We should have efficiency and flexibility. We are not tied to one supply chain. We don't want to be tied to regionalization. We also don't want to tie to completely 100% globalization. And the best answer is to have the configuration capability so that we can do both. Now, third A is alignment. Alignment is what also Victor talks about, that they want to make sure that they pay the suppliers, to make sure the suppliers are not being disrupted totally, not paying Bangladesh wages, not paying the South American, Mexican wages. Some brands did that because they have to survive. But the good brands, the strong brands, are the ones that says that maybe if there is some short-term pain, we share the pain. We share the pain. We protect our workers. We make commitment to our workforce. We try to service those who are vulnerable and have a fair treatment of the supply partners. I think this is very important. And I think this is what defensive supply chain needs to do in terms of alignment. But in the long term, we make use of this alignment to build a much stronger supply network relationship. I remember Cisco during the bubble burst in 2001, the burst of the bubble. What John Chambers says is that every time when we have the crisis, we want to make sure that our supply network is stable. We want to make sure we use that opportunity of a crisis to strengthen our relationship. Why? Because when things return, we have much better relationship. The suppliers will be with us to try to develop new products with us, to make sure we have the right capacity, strengthen the relationship. And the relationship should not be confined to only our immediate suppliers, but also governments, NGOs, activists, and so non-market forces. And then that would be a way for us to build a brand equity. I like the book that my friend Kelvin O'Mara published a couple of years ago, and the book title is Supply Chain Saves the World. It says that we in our supply chain are not just going out there for profit, for making a good life. We want to build strong supply chains to benefit the community, to benefit the society, to benefit everyone in concern. So those are the AAA supply chain, making sure we have total supply chain, defense and offense that I want to share with you. Thanks very much.
Need obviously to do two things. Number one, to keep our business running. We're classified as an essential service in every market in which we operate. So it was very important to us that we contribute to the society and to the community by continuing to operate and provide the support to those that needed it through the provision of our goods and services. But secondly, and more importantly, was the need to do that in a way which kept our employees, our contractors, our customers, their customers, and the families and communities in which we operate safe. So we made that our number 1, 2, and 3 priority. And that was a public statement from our chairman and CEO, Brad Jacobs, right at the outset. And that's been the constant theme of how we've approached this particular challenge. The benefit of that has been twofold. Obviously, we've been able to continue to support the community, but also we have been able to keep our people safe. But it's given us some really good insights into how we think this is going to play out and then how to position ourselves on the backside of that. So in terms of some of the specific tactical actions that we took, you know, obviously the first one was social distancing. Everyone's familiar with that. But, you know, in the context of 100,000 employees, you know, multiple thousands of sites globally, enforcing that and getting that in place is critical. And so, you know, the first thing that we did was make sure we had very clear and consistent protocols across all our operations for how we were going to enforce that. And, you know, we communicated that virtually and also, you know, through leaders talking to their people and cascading it down through the organisation and making sure that everyone was really clear about, you know, what it meant and what was expected. And where necessary, you know, we put physical barriers into workstations to ensure that people could go to work and feel safe in that environment. Secondly, we made sure that people who didn't have to go to work didn't go. You know, so we immediately made it possible for those employees that were not required, you know, to be on site to execute their duties to work from home. And I mean all of them. And we did that straight away. This wasn't something that we did gradually. You know, we did this before many other companies and certainly before many governments and, you know, regional authorities were putting those restrictions in place. We sent everybody home that didn't need to be there. And that was a very important moment for us. Obviously, it kept people out of harm's way, but it also allowed our employees to see that what we were saying, we were going to actually deliver on. And it wasn't just words, it was a real genuine commitment. And that was very well received by our people. We also introduced new benefits. So specifically pandemic sick leave, which wasn't a category of leave that existed before. You know, we offered full-time employees in the US and Canada up to 80 hours of additional time off. We put in place free COVID-19 testing. We enhanced our cleaning protocols, and this was, you know, expensive. And we perfected ways of cleaning locations where there had been a positive test. You know, and again, a practical and tactical action, which was necessary for us to be able to get good at very quickly. Professor Lee talked about agility, and I think if there's one thing that I've been able to take away from this is the power of our company to move quickly. And to adapt to a new circumstance and to continue our operations in a way which keeps everybody safe but also maximises return. You know, we have very generous workplace accommodations, particularly around things like pregnancy and so forth. But again, we made sure that people were aware that they had these rights. You know, people were feeling uncertain, adrift, and they were looking for sources of comfort, and we were able to provide those to them by emphasising that. We ramped up our employee assistance program for people that needed counselling because, you know, this was a traumatic event for many. There was genuine fear. And in some cases, you know, the human impact was pronounced. And that wasn't something we wanted to just brush over as a business. You know, we wanted to make sure that we were there for our employees. And then finally, we really ramped up our utilisation of technology. I mean, we're a massive consumer of tech. We spend north of 500 million a year on technology. We have teams of data scientists, and we rely on technology to deliver solutions for our customers and efficiencies that are ahead of our competition, and we've been very successful in being able to do that. But we turned that power towards educating our employees around coping with C-19 and the new reality and providing them resources. And again, you know, in a short period of time, we were able to get up and moving quickly on that, so that our employees were able to benefit from those initiatives. And so the point of sharing those with you is to emphasise that, first of all, as a company, we took clear and immediate and distinctive action around C-19. We didn't wait. Secondly, we put our employees and, you know, the safety of our people at the top of the list. And we utilised our capabilities in other areas to ensure that that was evident and the case. Thirdly, we backed it up with specific initiatives that that demonstrated that it wasn't just words, that it was something very specific. And as a result of that, and various other actions, we were able to, based on our employee engagement survey, improve our employee engagement survey in this critical time, our employee engagement responses. And for us, that's very, very important. And we're also able to continue to operate. So, in my business, for example, we have 170 dedicated locations. We deliver out of 10,000 stores. We do between 10 and 12 million deliveries a year, or 35,000 deliveries a day. And throughout this this whole process, we've continued to run every week. Now, we have made some concessions. So with respect to last mile, we've moved to what's called contactless delivery for anything that's non-essential. Now, if you look at the performance of our business, particularly my business, our business last mile is driven by e-commerce. And what we've seen, and these are, this is public information. We referenced that in our conference call on our first quarter earnings. But last mile had a standout quarter in the first quarter of 2020, and that's on the back of people, consumers, getting increasingly comfortable with the use of e-commerce to gather goods, to order and procure, to track, and if necessary, to complain. So, for example, appliances, our large retail customers, their volumes grew materially. Fitness equipment, we are the largest provider for Peloton, for example, the fitness bikes, but we also do tonal and mirror, and the demand for those services exploded. Whereas we had other segments like furniture, which was much more problematic, because all of those stores, and Victor talked about it earlier, as did Jürgen, the brick and mortar operations had to close down. So unless you had a viable e-commerce platform, unless you had a viable internet sales channel, then you struggled for volume. But if you were well positioned in that, then you saw strong volume in many instances, and in many segments, we were able to benefit from that and to grow our business, 9% year on year in the first quarter, which is material for us. Now, going forward, what we've said is that for us, we think in the near term, trading conditions are going to continue to be tough. So, we feel in the short term that it's a troubling outlook for commerce and for industry. However, we do believe that in the third and the fourth quarter, or into the medium term, if you will, that the economy is going to come back, and it's going to come back strongly. So what we're making sure that we're doing is anticipating the segments that are going to grow and positioning ourselves to benefit from that, whilst also reducing our exposure to other segments which we think will be compressed for an extended period. So a good example of the segments that will grow, obviously is e-commerce and anything related to that channel, where customers have a proven success rate of being able to get goods to market and to accrue demand on the back of their internet platform and their web sales. In other segments, we're backing off those a little bit because we think they're going to be a little slower to come back. The other thing that I would say about our business is, it's an asset-light model. So we're able to flex variable cost when demand softens, and that's very important for us, as we navigate our way through this, to ensure that we continue to generate particularly free cash. And our cash flow performance was very strong in the first quarter. Victor talked about managing liquidity. We look closely at working capital. We look closely at capital expenditure. And we monitored our AR very closely. We were able to deliver really good free cash flow. And in my opinion, the businesses that thrive or that make it through this scenario are going to be those that have good liquidity. Businesses that are struggling for cash are going to be the ones that are going to, I think, in my opinion anyway, find it tougher to make their way through. So we're very focused on that and very cognizant of that, and we're working closely on it. So the upshot of all that is that we were well positioned early. We moved quickly on critical initiatives. We put the priority of our business on keeping everybody safe. whilst continuing to run. We anticipated through detailed analysis where we were going to see demand and where we were going to see a softening, and we positioned our resources to benefit from that. We managed our cash very carefully. And as I say, whilst we see in the near term, a bearish economy, and we consider it, that conditions will continue to soften, we believe when we come out of this, we're going to come out of it strongly, and that'll be in the medium term, and we think we're really well positioned to benefit.
What we learn from this particular crisis and what we need to prepare. So two things which is given, I think this is some of the things which have been coming from some of the leaders in supply chain. One is, in terms of the management journey of crisis. So today, I would say we are between a response and a recovery phase to moving close to in terms of restoration of the supply chain and the prevention of future crisis of where we go. Okay, so this is where we are. What we learn from this is, like I explained before, the more important for our supply chain is any small chain breaks anywhere in the supply chain, right from technology aspect to the suppliers, to our delivery, to our manufacturing and the people. The recovery time for us is extremely longer. Okay, so anytime the chain breaks, the time to recover globally would be, going from weeks, which was a spot crisis, to all the way going to a month, or probably we need to spend more money to make sure we spend more cost, and that's another impact in terms of cost. Okay, we need to manage. The second important learning which we have in this particular crisis is the anticipation of future demand. Okay, so as we start to evolve on this process, what we need to understand, the future business could be, either a W shape. Okay, we see a complete drop, then there is a small recovery because of some segments, the digital segments like the data centers are in fact pulling orders. We see the hospital segments pulling orders. But what would be the situation going forward? Will it actually drop after some time? Okay, for the people to come back? We see unemployment rates going up. What does it mean? Will our customers come back to the normal? So it could be a W. It could be a U, which is a medium-term recovery that we are going through in the next 1 quarter, 2 quarters, little bit of a dam and then going up. Or will it be a long recovery wherein we need to anticipate, structural changes in our supply chain? Or will it be a V recovery, which is what, kind of everybody is working on a short term to say, okay, the demand is there, we have a lot of backlog, let's support it. So we have to, in fact, working on all the 3 scenarios or 4 scenarios as we speak. So if you go to the next page, Paulo. So a few things which, as we transition from more of a crisis response to a strategic transformation. So as I said, the first most important for us with such a big team spread across the globe is how do we organize the people in this new normal? Okay, as I spoke about protecting the people, how do we support on-site? But the key topic going forward would be how do we continue to protect these people and prepare this organization for the new capabilities and the new way of working. We have few examples wherein, for example, previously some of our customers used to prefer people coming on job site, coming to our meeting rooms, doing more and more. We see that the people are more comfortable to work, having negotiation, having discussion remotely. Okay, so they are comfortable. We are able to access more of their time. They are able to access more of our resources. They are able to access with our people the use of technology. So we need to build our team internally to be ready for these kind of shift in terms of the number of people able to use the new technologies. Okay, because we see today that there is only a small segment of people who are able to manage these technological changes, and we need to enlarge this group. Second thing is on the stabilization of supply chain. So we have been managing, in the crisis mode, how do we take care, how do we prioritize, how do we do the ramp up plan? But the more important for us is to be more resilient, because our supply chain, sometimes there are sites, which is one site in one geography taking care of customers worldwide. Okay, so how do we shorten this long supply chain? So when we see some of the areas, like for example, when the borders are closed. So for example, when China was not working when the crisis started, and when North America was still open, the borders were kind of closed. So how do we react with this kind of supply chain? Do we need to create a kind of flex center, for example, in North America, so that we can react to the customer in North America? Second thing is on sourcing. We have the similar challenge. We have many geographies, some of the many suppliers we have, for example, in France, in some of the economies, because of the traditionality of long history of Schneider, do we need to create for certain commodities, maybe a dual source in some other region to support those regions? Okay, so there are studies going on in terms of looking at how do we build some kind of redundancy, some kind of double sourcing as we move out of the crisis. The third important, is important why we are all together on this is because we need to manage our business and make sure we have successful business as we come out. So it's important for us to manage is the cash, because one of the key learnings as we see, we are a big company, we are still robust in terms of today the cash, but what we see is our suppliers are struggling. Okay, so this is a reality, and we know every day, bankruptcy, people are applying for bankruptcy in North America. We see people in Europe step by step decommitting. So I think this is the kind of things which we are seeing step by step on the supplier side. So first is how do we free up some of these funds to make sure on certain critical capacity and certain critical actions in some of the suppliers, how do we make a balance? I think this is something which we are trying to save some cash so that we can support some of the critical areas, which is for us the core in terms of sustenance. The next one, which is more structural, is to be agile, you need to be lean. And I think lean comes with how can we be driving much more structural cost down. So when the crisis started, of course, by choice and by reality, we stopped all our non-essential travel because of safety. But also, this is also going to be something which we are looking at in terms of long term. Which kind of investment can be a little bit prudent, which kind of businesses is going to take off, and where we want to put our monies on. And also to create some kind of flexibility in our supply chain where we can quickly add and reduce cost, okay, in terms of the way we want to be flexible. And finally, for us is important, as a business, is to keep our top line, because everybody is talking about what would be 2020 in terms of top line. People could be very, very positive in terms of comeback, but we need to create, the previous slide, as I shared, the fourth situation. What if it is a U or an L-shaped recovery for us? How do we want to ensure that this is kind of evened out and we don't see a sudden drop in the business? So we are making some of the structural changes, some of the actions within our supply chain, within our team, to work with some of the suppliers, some of the customers to predict and forecast probably in the medium term, what could be the support and how we can support them in terms of medium term business on some critical aspect. So with that, if I move to the next slide, probably the area which is important and we continue to work on, because currently, if you look at it, Schneider today, globally from Gartner top 25 supply chains, we have today progressively been improving to level 4, which has been announced last week. So we are very proud, basically because of three fundamental shifts what we have been doing in the last 5 years. One is, of course, the undetermined focus, which we call it as tailored supply chain, which is on the top list of the screen, which is how we are able to address to different customer segment. Okay, as I said, we have wide range of customer segments, right from industrial automation to digital space, to smart factories, to electrical network, to utility companies, to government agency, to health sector, to oil and gas. So we have a wide variety of customers whose requirement in terms of expectation are different. So we have been working in terms of addressing to that. Second topic which we have been very proudly working on is on our sustainability aspect, wherein we are ensuring to our customers, to our stakeholders, as well as to the local resource, our sustainability and our commitment to zero carbon neutral sites. So we continue to work on it. And finally, the adoption of connected. As we see, we are more and more connected in terms of digital capabilities, people getting connected, customers getting connected, delivery getting automated. How can we be digitized in terms of transformation? So these three fundamentals still remain, to focus on the overall. But the key topic which is coming for us is on the evolution of workplace. Okay, wherein the experience in the future going forward in terms of how a new workplace for the future would be looking like. How would be the talent scarcity as we come out of the crisis? We will have a lot of people on the market, on certain segments of the job, but we will at the same time have very limited resources on certain digital capabilities to make sure we run, operate, and continue to sustain this operation. We will have, of course, continue to have multi-generation workforce, which is going to come. Digital is going to be the norm. Every person will have a smartphone in the hands. So how can we leverage this? And finally, with all this, we have the risk of cybersecurity. Okay, with more digital coming in, we anticipate with the customer the requirement of how we can be cyber secured and how we can work in terms of the digital tools what we have. Okay, so this is some of the things what we are working in terms of evolution.
I'd like to take a moment and to take a break with our supply chain community to recognize the unique role supply chain plays in this crisis. And I think this is our moment. This is a unique moment where everyone recognizes in the organization that supply chain is really key, is really at the heart of the steering of the company, because in these very volatile markets, in this chaos, we need to coordinate, we need to orchestrate, we need to align, and this is truly the role of our supply chain. To illustrate this point, from the start of the crisis, we set up weekly steering process from the bottom up to the top of the company. For the last 10 weeks, I've been facilitating a SNOP meeting with the group executive committee headed by the CEO. There we arbitrate, we give direction, we align everyone, and I have to say it has been quite successful. When we look, just to give you an example, demand planning, you know, is at the heart of the science of supply chain, and we've been able, the first week of April, to forecast our April sales landing with a 1% error. For Europe, 1%, for North America, 1%, which is just, I would say, unbelievable given the context. But I think it's the result of our collective intelligence. You might think it's a pure luck and that I should go to Vegas. Maybe I should. Now, when I look at the sales of this month in May, we should probably get close to the 1%, maybe 2-3%, but it's, I think it's the demonstration that it's not luck. And again, it's the power of the end-to-end supply chain steering and leveraging what we learn in one region to the other region. So company steering, supply chain is really there to support, and I think we have a unique role to play there. Second point I want to highlight is the cash management, again, the priority for the group. When we look at what we do have in our inventory, we carry more than 4 billion euro of cash in our inventories. So reducing our inventory is clearly a way to free up cash for the group. And we're there to orchestrate this inventory reduction. And third point I want to highlight is the logistics. You know, logistics is very often seen as is under the radar. It's a pure execution layer. You just need to make it happen. And this, in these very special times, and Kartik was referring to that as well, our logistics team have done a tremendous job to secure shipments of critical products to customers to ensure the business continuity of our customers, the logistics of masks and sanitary devices as well. So again, I think the crisis is there to remind us all, and I know you're all passionate about supply chain, that supply chain is really definitely the place to be today more than yesterday and less than tomorrow. When we move to the next slide, Paolo, let's look at the future now. And here to start, I like to quote Don. Don once said something that I find very relevant. He said, "The future is not to be predicted, it is to be achieved." And frankly, I love this quote because I think that today it would be useless to spend our resources to try to predict a very uncertain future, to try to define the exact demand scenario that will occur in the next quarters, in the next years. Our job is more to redesign our supply chain and to adapt the way we steer our supply chain in a way that we can cope with different scenarios and to be more reactive, to be more flexible to different scenarios, to be more resilient to different scenarios. And here I want to pause and look at 2 points. First one is the supply chain design. Kartik touched upon it, but I think we need to build resilient supply chain. to me, the first driver that we have been pushing at Michelin for a few years now is the short lead time supply chain. And we've been doing that essentially for social reasons. We want to produce close to the markets we serve. First point. Second point is for environmental reasons. We want to reduce our CO2 emission, and long lead time supply chains produce CO2. So the short lead time supply chain is something we've been pushing for a while, but I think it's more and more needed, and we're really changing gear there to ensure that we shorten the lead time of our supply chains, which is good for the service, which is good for the inventory, and which is good for the planet. When we talk about resilient supply chain, I'd like to mention as well what Professor Oli described in the previous webinar that Paolo organized, which is the concept of configurable supply chain. And I really loved it, because I think that is precisely what we're experiencing in this crisis, is that the strength of your supply chain is as strong as your weakest link. And previously you may think, okay, let's strengthen this weakest link. But I believe that it's not the right way to handle that, and that you better have alternative to your weakest link in different regions versus trying to strengthen your weakest link. And this is what I understood the concept of configurable supply chain that Professor Lee told us last time. And we're working on that as well, ensuring the dual sourcing of critical components, as Kartik mentioned. Second point is about the steering. We're learning a lot in this crisis. I would say that we're moving from heavy monthly processes with a lot of details to much more agile, high-level, quick decision way of steering, bringing all the stakeholders in the same virtual room and making decisions. And I'm convinced that we've learned a lot, and we will ensure that we continue some of those practices, and that we make our supply chain steering evolve in order to be, again, more reactive and more efficient. To conclude, and if you go to the next slide, Paolo, I'd like to conclude with one of my favorite quotes in these times. The meaning of this quote is actually close to Don's quote. It's from the great movie Terminator, one of the greatest movies of all time, you would guess. And Sarah Connor says, "The future is not set. There is no fate, but what we make." There is no fate, but what we make. And I'm very much convinced that the future that we are building all together, and with this supply chain community to start with, will enable a better place for our kids, and will enable a safer future for the planet as well.
The whole issue of supply chain is probably going through the biggest change since the invention of the computer and early applications. So, and let me describe that. And I'll start with a little history. I wrote a couple of books in the 1980s that nobody read. I think my mother bought most of the copies. But I finally wrote a couple of bestsellers in the early 1990s. Paradigm Shift, which was obviously a big book, and The Digital Economy, which is the first bestseller about the web. And I was asked to write the 20th anniversary edition of The Digital Economy 20 years later. And I had to think about where have we been and where are we going. And it occurred to me that I concluded that we've really gone through the first era of the digital revolution. Mainframes, mini computers, PCs, the internet, the web, the cloud, the mobile web, social media, big data. And now technology is infusing itself into everything, into the physical world, with billions and trillions of inert objects becoming smart communicating devices. We have technology that can learn and do things that it wasn't programmed to do. And I found myself coming to a surprising conclusion that the foundational technology for this second era was in fact blockchain. And to me, the way I think of this is that it's really the second era of the internet. So let me just talk to you about three things. One is the promise of this technology on supply chain. Secondly, I'd like to talk to you about where we're currently at. And then three, pose some questions about how do we get from here to there. So the first idea is that for 40 years, we've had an internet of information, and I've sort of been working with this the whole time. I was at Canada's Bell Labs, Bell Northern Research in the 70s. Back then it was called the ARPANET. But it was an internet of information. And if I send you some information, a PDF of this deck, say, transact with information, I'm actually not sending you the information, I'm sending you a copy. Even with a website, I keep the original. That works great for information. But when it comes to this stuff of supply chains, assets, things of value like money or contracts or deeds or financial assets, IOUs, bills of lading, stocks, securities, the data in our identities, in IP, even cultural assets like art or music or votes. A vote is an asset, something of value that belongs to somebody. When it comes to assets, copying those is a bad idea. You don't want someone copying your vote or your identity. And if I send you $1,000, it's really important that I don't still have the money. So cryptographers have called this the double spend problem for decades. And the way that we manage this problem in our economy and in commerce and in supply chains is through middlemen, banks, stock exchanges, credit card companies, social media companies, governments. They perform all of the business and transaction logic for every type of commerce. They identify the asset, they identify the party, they clear and settle transactions, and they keep records. And overall, they've done a pretty good job, but there are growing problems. They slow things down. Why does it take 4 to 7 days for money to go from a housekeeper in Toronto to her mom in Manila? And why is she charged 10 to 20% by Western Union? Anyone ever heard of cross-border email charges? It should be equally as complicated. They exclude a couple of billion people from the global economy. They're based on central systems, which means that they can be hacked. There are two types of these central systems, those that have been hacked and those that will be hacked. And the big problem is that we create this data, the new asset class of the digital age, but they capture it. That means that we can't use it, we can't monetize it, and our privacy is being undermined. So what if there were not just an internet of information? What if there were an internet of value, some kind of vast global distributed ledger where anything of value, from money to securities to contracts, could be managed, stored, transacted in a secure way, peer-to-peer? Well, that's what Satoshi Nakamoto, an anonymous person or persons, solved in 2008. He wrote a paper that solved the double spend problem. And to me, this is the biggest innovation in computer science in a generation. And now, for the first time ever, people could transact with assets peer-to-peer. And trust is not achieved by a middleman, it's achieved by cryptography and collaboration and some clever code, which is why we call it the trust protocol. It's the first ever native digital medium for trust. Now, supply chains are all about trust, and they're all about assets. So this is a pretty exciting opportunity. The promise that we describe in the book is that this is going to completely transform every institution in society, because we can now have a native digital medium for assets. It's going to lead to big changes in the nature of the corporation. Supply chains will become real time with a single version of the truth. Money will become truly digital. It's not digital today. And we can solve a lot of intractable problems in society. Now, what's the reality? Well, these are 10 areas that we look at the Blockchain Research Institute, and I don't have time really to go into them today. But I would like to focus in on this issue of supply chains, because to us, blockchain is the new supply chain. Think about it. You got all these different parties working together, and there are big transaction costs that prevent them from collaborating fully. And you got trains and boats and planes and trucks and bills of lading and contracts and all kinds of intermediaries, transfer agents and escrow agents and partners, and there's trade finance happening across all of this, tax authorities at boundaries, borders. You got all these traditional systems, EDI and ERP, and there's paper and all kinds of ancient technologies going back decades. What if all of that were a shared network state, a real-time state on a real-time ledger, where there was a single version of the truth, where you could have smart payments that self-execute, where you could eliminate lawyers, or a lot of lawyers, where you could have micropayments, where in a supply chain, a device could be purchasing power from an auction and finding the best source of power, and the reputation of that device could be enhanced because it paid for the power. This would be an extraordinary thing, and it's beginning to happen now. Now, it began with stuff like the IBM Food Trust, Walmart, Golden State Foods, Kroger, a number of other companies working together to build the food trust. And it started with avocados. It used to take Walmart 3 weeks to figure out where a bad avocado might have come from that ended up poisoning somebody. Now it can do it in 20 seconds. So this is one of the powerful things about supply chains is that on a blockchain is the notion of provenance. Another thing is the notion of authenticity. If you have some seafood today, a third of the time it's incorrectly labeled. It's cheap fish labeled as expensive fish, or it's endangered species labeled as okay species. Well, now there are implementations underway, largely in Hyperledger, which is one of the big supply chain platforms and blockchain platforms to solve that problem. Conflict diamonds have killed hundreds of thousands of people in Africa, other parts of the world. Diamonds funding tribal wars, terrorism, crime. This has pretty much been solved by the Kimberley process and by a blockchain-based platform called Everledger, where you can know the provenance of a diamond. Volvo is using blockchain for, hang on here, it's the first car maker to implement a global traceability a program for cobalt used in batteries. And it uses blockchain. It's got an agreement with its 2 global battery suppliers and a blockchain solution using IBM and also a company called Circular to implement the system. Data on the blockchain can include the cobalt's origins, its attribute, weight, size, chain of custody. And this obviously creates trust between the various participants on the supply chain and ensures that customers can drive electrified Volvo cars, knowing that the material from batteries has been sourced responsibly. So what about pandemic? Well, we obviously have a big problem here. And, you know, the global pandemic today is creating horrific economic costs, and the human costs are still incalculable. And this is going to go on for a while. So turns out that this has stimulated huge thinking in supply chains, because the pandemic has created such a global crisis that it's causing us to scrutinize not only our leaders and how they're reacting, and our governments and other institutions, it's causing us to scrutinize our systems as well. So how can we have hoarding today? Why would someone buy 3 years of toilet paper if there was a supply chain that was transparent, and when they knew that toilet paper was coming real soon, it'd be really easy to get toilet paper? So, or how can it be possible that we're having trouble getting a paper mask to frontline workers? Our supply chain should be able to deliver that. So at the Blockchain Research Institute, we've launched a big program looking at pandemics and blockchain. And normally companies pay a couple $100,000 to join this research. And we've made this particular report available to the public. And you can get the report just by going to blockchainresearchinstitute.org, and it'll be right there, and you can download it. And we're looking at all kinds of things: health data, the notion of a blockchain-based sovereign medical record that's capturing real-time data, like your heart rate, your temperature, also your location, and where through agreement, we could agree that governments and epidemiologists and clinicians can get access to anonymized data to better predict a pandemic in the early stages. We can have incentives based on blockchain for people to behave responsibly. We could have good skills and talent registries for people moving across borders. We could have digital money. It turns out that cash not only has the disadvantages of funding crime and the global drug industry and tax evasion and so on, it's also dirty, and it carries viruses. So we need to move towards digital cash. And a big one is just-in-time supply chains. So the opportunities here are multiple. First of all, tracking and procuring of medical supplies. You should be able to know where stuff is in a supply chain. That should be real time, and you can fix it. Secondly, we should be able to track the authenticity of assets. You know, is that a ventilator that's been approved? Is that a real N95 mask? The whole issue of logistics, transport, and custody, we should be moving to a real-time platform so that we don't have problems getting toilet paper. And there are companies right now that are able to manufacture PPEs through 3D printing right at a location, like in a hospital. And they use blockchain as the channel for distributing that. So just an example, in the report, we talk about blockchain in the pharmaceutical industry. And these are examples of all kinds of interesting companies that are doing great things in that platform. So thank you, Paula, for mentioning this new book. It is now shipping on Amazon. Just a couple more thoughts. I think that as supply chains become based on blockchain, we're in the early days of some deep changes to the architecture of the firm. And this is going to open up all kinds of new capabilities for supply chains. 80 years ago, a Nobel Prize-winning economist named Ronald Coase asked a deceptively simple question. He said, "Why does the firm exist?" Adam Smith is right. In the open market's the best mechanism for allocating goods and resources. Why isn't everybody an independent contractor at every step along the way in production? Why isn't everything a giant supply chain without organizations? And he said, the answer is, and he won a Nobel Prize for saying this, the answer is transaction costs. And he described that broadly. He said the cost of search. Imagine trying to find all the right assets or people or money or information in an open market. That'd be prohibitive. So we bring that inside the boundaries of the firm, where if we have things like filing cabinets to find information and org charts to find people and so on. He said the cost of coordination. Imagine trying to get all these people to work together who've never met. The costs are lower inside a firm where you have org charts and compensation systems and management structures. The cost of contracting. Imagine if every little activity in a supply chain and in our economy required a contract. That'd be totally prohibitive. And overall, the costs of establishing trust. Blockchain are beginning to devastate these costs. So it's because of this that the industrial age firm was vertically integrated, did everything from soup to nuts. And then a paradigm shift, I said the boundaries of the firm are becoming more porous. This is 1994. Then in the later 90s, the internet dropped transaction costs and we had business webs or ecosystems. And now we're moving towards a new model of distributed value creation where supply chain becomes the heart of everything. And as a thought experiment, Alex and I in Blockchain Revolution said, well, how far could this go? Could you have an organization which was highly automated and had no people, but was very complex? And we called it the Distributed Autonomous Enterprise, or Decentralized Autonomous Enterprise. And we almost didn't publish it because we thought it was so futuristic. A week after the book came out, an organization called the Decentralized Autonomous Organization was launched. It was a company with no people on a blockchain. It was a venture capital company, and in 3 weeks, it raised $164 million, an order of magnitude larger than any other crowdfunding campaign ever conducted, and went about its business. Now, it's not a happy ending because there was a coding error in the smart contract facility, and some hackers were able to potentially do some damage. So the creators of this thing gave all the money back. But it posed a fascinating issue, which is that if you can have a corporation with no people, in some ways, ultimately, the basic unit of examination and measurement and innovation and production for an economy is not the firm, it's the supply chain. So, pretty big ideas. This is not a theory. This is all rolling out today. How do we get there? Well, there are all kinds of impediments. And this is a new paradigm. When you get one of these, you get a leadership crisis. Vested interests fight against change, and leaders of old paradigms have great difficulty embracing the new. And it's for that reason that we launched the Blockchain Research Institute. Our goal is to bridge the gap between the potential of this technology and the actual deployment. We're the largest independent think tank in the world. We have 60 faculty, 20 full-time employees, and we're funded by 80 major corporations and some governments. We're doing 110 research projects, and I would welcome an inquiry from any of you about how to get your company involved in our work, because you can acquire millions of dollars for a lot less than that. And I want to share one thing with the attendees at this webinar today, which is that we spent almost $1 million developing a full program of courses on blockchain. And it's done through INSEAD, who is a founding academic partner of the Blockchain Research Institute. These courses are available on the Coursera platform, the largest provider of online education in the world. So what's the future going to bring? Well, I kind of like what Pierre Martin said. Let me paraphrase it differently. The future is not something to be predicted. The future is something to be achieved. And we can achieve a very different future than the one that seems to be facing planet Earth right now. We can build much more innovative, productive, sustainable businesses and a much more open and just society using this technology. I'd encourage all of you to pick up the new book, on Amazon.